Hello, my name is Carol May Whittick. I support women to bloom in midlife with creativity and spiritual life coaching. I'm your host of Her Conversations, Tools for the Awakening. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. This is the optimal state to embody in order to attract our highest desires. What is the awakening? This is the moment in time when humanity rises up out of the darkness. Who is awakening? Each one of us present on earth today, reclaiming our sovereignty, seeking greater possibilities in our reality and looking for solutions. We know being awakened is not a lofty ideal but a necessity. If we can transform ourselves, we can change the world. Guests on Her Conversations speak to your spirituality, sensuality and soul. Listen to their stories and hear how they are in service to the world. Let their words and these conversations embolden and inspire you. Before this episode, I encourage you to download my midlife meditation that was created to remind you that your life is a precious gift and reaching midlife is a milestone worth celebrating, marking the start of an exciting new chapter. And also come and join me on Her Inspirations, which is the sister podcast to this title. In each solo episode, I aim to inspire my midlife sisters to recognise and embrace the wisdom of our experience and allow this next season of our life to be the best, the most free and the most fruitful. Midlife is your time to bloom. Links to everything are in the show notes below. My guest this week is Jane Reason. She is an accomplished leader, educator and coach with nearly 2 decades of executive leadership. She holds space for women leaders, educators and entrepreneurs who want to explore new possibilities and new ways of being. During our conversation, Jane shares about transitioning from her career and the observations that led her to coaching, in particular changing the narrative around burnout and working with women in midlife. She also discusses the driving forces behind our actions, the keys to our success, and the hidden obstacles that can impede us. So as always, I begin by asking my guest. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. When do you feel that higher energetic resonance?
I've been really thinking about this, and there's so many different places where I recognise that I'm in that higher energetic state. And community has a real, it's something to do with community that really brings that in. So the first one that came to mind was being in open water, in nature, in the sea, in a lake in woodland with others and enjoying that experience together. And there's something that's beautiful, more beautiful about it, that brings more energy when you're with others than when you're on your own. There's a beauty in both, but the energy is greater when you're with others. And another time that really brings me to that state is when I'm working with a client and suddenly that insight drops in and they see their world so differently and they are a different person from that moment onwards. And there's energy that just flows through me at that point because it's so beautiful and so magical and so precious to be able to create that with people.
Before we go into the rest of our conversation, Jane, I always like to give my guests an opportunity to just share about who you are and how you got to doing the work that you're doing today.
Okay, so my story is one of, I was a teacher and a head teacher. So for 28 years, I worked in education. And in that time, I realised, looking back, that I probably had a cycle of burnout, sort of every 3 to 4 years. My brain and body would kind of go, do you know what, we've had enough. And because I'd recognised that the body symptoms were first, because I'd recognised towards the end that those body symptoms didn't mean I was actually ill, I ignored them. And I kept on ignoring them to the extent that my brain then stopped working. So I would say I can't think. Not that it's difficult for me to think or I've got a migraine. I literally couldn't access thinking. It was a process, and my job as a head teacher and a deputy CEO required quick thinking, and I'd always lived off quick thinking, and I didn't have that. And eventually I made the decision to leave, and shortly after making that decision, had to take time off work. And in those conversations, I was pointed to the idea that maybe I had burnout. And I hadn't even considered that. I don't think I'd even heard the words burnout before. But my thinking had been, even like 6 months before, if only I was admitted to hospital, I could have a break. And when I said that to the lady I was talking to, the medical professional I was talking to, she said, "You're in burnout. That's a very typical sign of burnout." And when I left my role as a teacher, and I was so passionate about education, I loved my job. When I left it, I knew I couldn't carry on. That was probably the illness, but I had no idea of what was next. And then this idea came sort of into evolution of using the skills I have as a coach that I'd honed over the last 20 years to create a business. And from that and my scientific background, I was exploring, okay, I had burnout. What was going on here? And I realized that midlife and menopause had a significant role to play, because there's research out there that says women in service industry, service sector in particular, so nursing, teaching, those sorts of areas, where we always put others before ourselves. That's kind of the way that the sector works. Going through midlife, we're far more likely to have burnout than anybody else. So that was an interesting thing. So I started off by just being a menopause educator because I was still recovering from burnout. So I set up a Facebook group and started talking to people around how they can experience menopause in a very positive way and look forward, not look backwards. And that took off. And then I realized there was more that I wanted to do. And so this kind of thing around being a transformational coach, not just coaching, but this idea that through listening deeply to others, I could use that skill and create major transformations, magical transformations for others. And I started to really enjoy that. And I want to do something around burnout. And the key thing for me is burnout has to be a thing of the past. It's something that we don't need to have in modern day life. We can operate in a different way that means burnout doesn't exist. And that's kind of a big passion. That's my big mission statement, if you like. Burnout is no longer a thing.
Great. Thank you, Jane. I like that. And there's so many points as well that kind of align, especially talking about the women going through menopause, this midlife mindset, and what is possible for us, because all of that needs to change. But just to stay on the idea of burnout and what you're saying, your mission is to make sure that burnout doesn't exist, because it doesn't have to exist. And I'm in agreement with you. One thing I will say is that sometimes people like to take on these badges of, well, I'm just burnt out. I'm so busy. Oh my God, almost as a sign of honor. I'm doing so much that I'm wearing myself out to the ground. And it gives a sense of value, as uncomfortable as it is, and as unproductive as it is to every other area of your life. There's this element that I've noticed sometimes of people who want to take on labels of things that we would be like, well, why would you want to align yourself with that? So why do you think someone would want to align themselves with that? And how can they find identity outside of being a burnt out so-and-so?
The thing that strikes me is that as a society, we've changed how we value things. And so we value overworking. And we put high tariff on that. I'm superhuman. I can work myself to the ground, and so that creates this thing whereby it's the right thing to do. And look at me, I'm doing all of this. I've seen this gradually, develop and be created over time. There's also this thing around being needed. That can also drive that, because I'm superhuman, I can do all of this. Everybody gives me more to do. They often say, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. And there's kind of an association with people who constantly work being the superheroes in life. And so where I see this mission is threefold, really, because a lot of this starts with how we see the world and our thinking and our beliefs. And they are just that. They're just thoughts. They're just beliefs. They don't have any reality associated with them. and therefore they can change. And what I mean by that is I'm jumping on my science here. How each of us perceive the world is incredibly different. How, there are so many millions of people, billions of people on the earth. There are that many different ways of viewing it. Because none of us see the same thing, none of us hear the same things, and none of us taste the same things. None of us feel the same things. Because our body and our brain creates them. It takes the signals and creates them. And that's a process. And what it does is it goes, oh, this is what I already know about the world, so this must be what it is now.
Mm.
And that's what our beliefs do. We look through these binoculars that go, there's the world that agrees with my beliefs, so that must be the real world. And we miss absolutely everything else because we're not seeing it, because our brain is comfortable with what it already knows. But there's so much more. So this is where beliefs can change. Your reality can change. And that's where I see my role as a coach. Not creating you and giving you new beliefs, but allowing you to see for yourself that there's more to the world than how you see it. And, one of those miraculous things is realizing that no's not a terrible word. That no is a really powerful word that protects your boundaries. So it allows you to have boundaries, allows you to create the life and your life in a way that works for you and for everybody in your life. This is the thing. When we constantly work, we're not present. I was in this frame. There are times in my life that I can't remember unless I look at photographs. I don't remember them existing. And the reason I don't remember them existing is I wasn't present. I was physically there, but my brain was elsewhere. And we do this so much. We spend our life looking at what's next, forgetting that now is the most important time in our life because we'll never get it back. And so slowing down and being in the now is one of the key things for me. But then there's a societal thing, because there's this societal belief. And that's where communicating is really important. How come we've got to here? We weren't like this. If you Google, there's a way you can on Google you can look at the appearance of a word and how more often it's used in technical papers and things like that. So burnout as a phrase was described by somebody back in the 70s, and then it's in the 2000s, and it's taken off. The number of times that we're talking about burnout, it's become this thing. And you talk to people owning it as a badge of honor. There's also hiding behind it as a badge of honor. Because there's that thing of, well, I'm working myself into the ground. I'm truly burnt out. Almost like I therefore need to stop for a bit. So I'm going to boom, bust, boom, bust. What if we just went at a pace whereby it's the tortoise and the hare? What if we just went at a pace that worked for our bodies and brains all the time? We would be far more productive.
And I hear what you're saying. I think one of the reasons why people will hold on to the idea of burnout or having to work to burnout is the idea of this race, the rat race that we're all in. We kind of get on when we're in our 20s and we just like go for it and we keep going. We're trying to create all of the things and all of the success, which more times than not, especially with the conversations that I have, is based on somebody else's measure, somebody else's metric. It's like, well, if I don't do this by this and if I don't do that by that, then it means, and one of the things that I find is really helpful, even though I mainly speak to women in their midlife, is on the occasions when I speak to younger women who are in their 20s, especially they're having this like 30 loom up on them. You know, that's the first one where you think you're just like, it's all over. If I don't do all of these things by the time I'm 30, it's all over, it's finished. I'm like, trust me, it ain't. You
Yeah.
know, it's like it's just beginning, and that first decade is the first decade that you've probably been properly independent. So you don't, you know, respectfully, you don't have the perspective to make a decision or to make a proclamation like it's all over. It's not all over, but there's this pressure for you to do all these things and burn yourselves out to the.
There is,
Mm,
and there's also an option. So it's interesting you say 30. At 30, I changed career. I went from being a research scientist to being a teacher. And then at 56, 57, I changed career again. And I went from being a head teacher and, you know, a very successful head teacher, deputy CEO, to being a transformational coach. And I know people in their 70s who are reinventing themselves yet again, and they're full of energy, they're full of life, and they're full of possibilities. And I think this is the thing, it's not a race. And looking back, you know, my husband's just turned 60 today. So looking back at life, there's a perspective I can bring to it, which is saying, slow down. You will still get there. And you'll get there more healthily.
mm,
And there's this amazing thing that it's only because people do things to a ridiculous timescale that we expect things done to a ridiculous timescale.
mm,
It's only because people will work more hours than they're paid to work that we expect people to do that.
mm,
And so you can flip this conversation. I mean, there's a great guy called Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've come across him. And he really talks to this. The first time I came across him was when he was talking about purpose and purpose driven. Understand your why and everything else follows. And that was brilliant. But also what I hear him talking about now also is this idea of life in balance. Not just work-life balance, but life in balance. And reinventing the way that corporate life works, and reinventing the way we see working life, and realizing that it's just life,
mm,
and that we only get one shot at this, and it's not a race. It's a whole shift in thinking, and I think it's coming. There are more and more people talking about this and going, this isn't healthy. The way we see the world isn't healthy. You know, it's not healthy for our young people. It's not healthy for anybody. There's so many experience. I mean, it used to be a thing in the past that people in, say, medicine, GPs, because GPs have always seemed to have to work a lot more than you'd expect. And there was this known fact that GPs would get to retirement and not live much longer than that.
right.
And I think there's an element of this when we race in order to have the retirement of our life, we're not in a fit state to enjoy that retirement.
Mm,
And so what matters more? And the answer is life, experiencing, being present for, enjoying life matters more. And when we all slow down, everything slows down. So this is why it's multiple prongs. It's individually changing the way we think. And my work is with the leaders, with the change makers. Because when you change their thinking, you change everything.
mm,
And it's changing, it's changing the conversation, it's changing the rhetoric, it's changing the belief system of the communities. And it's changing policies in businesses and in governments as well, so that we start to realize that we can't have more for less, which is what everybody has been aiming for since the 80s. This idea of more, less time that you paid for, less time to live, It's not healthy.
No. Can you talk more about that? The changing the policy within business.
So there's this it's this recognition that it's kind of like a well-being revolution within business. This recognition that the employees have lives. And one of the things I've heard Simon Sinek talk about, I mean, initially what he introduced was kind of like these well-being days, which weren't days of holiday and they weren't sick days. But somebody would just get up and go, do you know what? Work's not the thing for me today. And ring in and say, that's what I'm doing today. He's moved it forwards in a very big way now, and I can't remember exactly how he's doing it. But it's this it's essentially this idea that you give people flexibility in how they show up and when they show up. Within reason, obviously, you have to achieve the outcomes that you set yourself to achieve. But there's also this realization that we need to slow down on that. You know, one of the things that put me in burnout was saying yes to so many different things. I knew how to do them all. And everybody seemed to think they were all urgent. The problem was I couldn't do them all at once. Yes, I was the right person to do them, but not all at the same time. So then there's this thing around scheduling, valuing the fact that to do things well, sometimes it's about focus and slowing down. So this is where that comes in terms of corporate and educational policy. I mean, we're stuck. I mean, my background is schools, and we're very much stuck in this place with schools where it's like, give them more time in school, then they'll learn more. Yeah, let's add to the hours. Let's make them be in school. And yet, the truth of the matter is that we don't learn when we're tired. We don't learn when we're stressed. We don't learn when all that anybody's ever telling us is you need to get better at results. You're not good enough. Spend more time on it. That's not how learning works. That's not how productivity works. It doesn't work by sitting there and going, I work from 9 o'clock till 6 o'clock and I'm going to push through whatever. Because sometimes you're not going to get much done because your brain's just had enough. And it might be that you'd be better off going, do you know what? I'm not going to do anything today. Tomorrow, I'll work a bit longer because tomorrow I'm going to be in focus. Yeah. It's that. It's that recognizing that we aren't machines and we don't work that way.
Yeah. How can that trust be built up? I think the trust be built up from the employer to know that if they allow their employees to have a specific amount of well-being days, that when they come in, that they're going to be as productive as they need to be.
Okay, so this is a really interesting thing, isn't it? Because the other thing that I said is we need to slow down. And so sometimes less is more. Sometimes less is more, and it's recognizing that. But trust is a really interesting thing, and this is around communication. This is around showing that you're operating from the same space. So I remember as a head, somebody said to me, some of your teachers are leaving really early. And I went, you know what? If they've got to get home and pick their kids up, that's not a problem for me. All that matters for me is that they show up in their lessons and teach the best lessons that they can, and that they mark their books and they write their reports and all of the other things that they needed to do as a teacher. I didn't care whether they worked, in the school from, 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. or arrived half an hour before the meeting time or just before the meeting time, left early. I trusted that they would show up and do the job that I needed them to do. And there's this thing that says if they renege on that trust, then there's action that the leader can take. So trust can be implicit and it comes from the leader, which is why, in terms of the coaching, it's about working with leaders and game changers, because it's about them seeing they can let go. And by letting go, they're not releasing they're not lowering standards. We don't need to lead through control. We need to lead through freedom. When you lead through freedom, people take that trust and they don't misuse it. My experience is that very few people abuse trust when it's given to them.
I like that, the idea of letting go. I mean, it's been many years since I've been in a situation of employment, but one of the things that I always bucked against was the fact that I was not trusted, and there was this idea that if they gave an inch, we'd take a mile, dare we do anything other than be doing all the things all the time from the second that we walked through the door till the second that the clock hit 5 and we could escape. And it built up this idea of mistrust. Then you just thought, like, they clearly don't think that much of me, they don't respect me as a person. They think past that I'm here to kind of like take the mickey. But you kind of develop that because people think that, and it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy, because you assume that people are taking advantage of you, and so you treat them like people who are taking advantage of you, and they're like, okay, then, well, if that's what you think, then and you've got this kind of battleground. So, and I like the idea that your work is solely going is very much starting where it matters with the leaders as well. Do you if you do, what areas of resistance do you feel or do you hear when they're talking about that? Specifically, I don't know if you're working with people who've been in their positions for a long time. So if you're getting them to try to change their mindset and their view of how they treat their teams and their employees, because one of the things that I will say, speaking to younger people and people who are just entering into university or just coming out of university and entering into the workforce or further education, is one, they might be very reticent about going into employment anyway, because they have the evidence of their parents who worked for 40 or 50 years, who clearly didn't like their work, who would come home and complain about the people at work, the boss at work, this idea. But they're like, but go to university and find yourself a job and do what I did for 40 years. Don't worry about the fact that I complained about it, so it's this, so there's this kind of push up against not wanting to really enter into this 40-year tunnel that they can come out and maybe have 10 or 20 for themselves if they're lucky. So there's that pullback as well.
There is. This is it. This is that whole idea of we run for 40 years to escape for 10 or 20, and it's just not viable. We can't do it. And it's often, so when you talked about what resistance do I gain, that's a really interesting question, because the way I work is through listening, reflecting, and challenging. And so the outcomes that my clients come from them. And when they create it, the resistance is already gone because they've allowed that thought in. However, I can talk back to my experience as a leader, my experience as a head teacher and as a deputy CEO. And my experience there, I experienced within education a number of leaders who were control freaks, I would call them. Yeah. And I understood where they're coming from. There's this real pressure, in education that's in the public eye. It's really in the public eye, you're succeeding or you're failing. And the minute you're not doing as well as you could, there's a bad news story in the press. It's very, very public, or you're being lambasted by government and government agents, So there's a real pressure. And particularly, I took over a failing school, and I was under pressure from the governing body and the local authority to have a very controlling approach over how my staff worked. And I chose the exact opposite. I chose to empower my staff and create the future with them. As a result, we went from inadequate to good in 2 years, which is pretty impressive. and and sustained it. And it was because, and there's a beautiful book and TED talk called "Turn the Ship Around," where this submarine captain takes over a submarine that he knows nothing about. And the old way in submarines is that the captain has to know everything about the submarine, and then he tells people exactly what they have to do. And he realized he couldn't learn everything about this submarine instantly. And so he took a different approach, which is each person in this submarine knows their job inside out. So I'm going to set the direction and they're going to call the shots. And that's what I did as a leader. I created the direction of travel. I created but I co-created it. I involved my staff in that. But that direction of travel was owned and everybody knew it, understood it, knew what the school was about. And then I trusted them to make decisions. I trusted them to make decisions on the basis that those would be aligned with this co-created direction of travel. So that's how you do it. You have to believe. It's also, you can't create rapid fixes, because with rapid fixes, it's much harder to do it this way, because with rapid fixes, you're wanting a sudden change in behavior and a very quick reaction. But the problem with those rapid changes is people might do it for a short period of time, and then they're like you, they resent it. So you haven't got this long term. So this is why you get in schools these rapid turns around, and then that superhead who was telling everybody what to do and doing all the thinking leaves. Oh, we don't have that anymore, because they're not used to having to think. So what's best is lead with trust, lead with empowerment, lead with love. Come from a place of everybody wants to do the right thing. Give them a direction and trust them to know their job and take those actions.
I want to also come back to now speaking about women and the group that you initially set up as well, about women in menopause. And this is a really important shift as well that we're seeing as well. I'm seeing that now that, and obviously I'm more cognizant of it because I'm at that age now. I'm in my 50s. I'm like, oh, okay, here I am. It wasn't as terrible as it was made out to be.
Exactly.
Because again, when I'm speaking to women in their 20s, like younger women, is that if you are thinking that it's all over now, if you don't get it done now and it's all over now, and you're gonna resent every day that you live, because you're getting closer to that age that you don't want to be, and you're just not going to enjoy your life. You're going to be living your life in friction, living your life rushing, trying to get everything done before whatever day you think you've set up as the day that the hammer goes down on you, and it's all downhill from then. But if you're lucky enough to get to midlife, if you've lived long enough, if you've been given the gift of life, then appreciate you've been given the gift of life. But having this kind of terror about getting older and doing everything against it, nature is going to do what nature does, and you will get older, your body will change, but also your mindset will change, but also you need to be doing that work. And I think it's good for us to be doing this work with the midlife women now, but I think we then also need to speak to the younger women as well, and actually set them up so that they don't come crashing into this crisis in midlife. Because if you have a better viewpoint of where you're going, then you're not going to be there in dread. And then the minute whatever age is your age, you turn 40, then you're deciding that you're going to burn everything to the ground, because you haven't had a perspective. You've given yourself, 15 or 20 year window of life, and then you've decided that whatever happens after that, it doesn't make any sense, and you need to kind of, like you say, map it out and look at how long do you think you're going to live, or like look at how long people are living around you, like on average, how long are people are living in your family. For me, it's 90, so I'm kind of halfway through, so I have to kind of think on what am I going to do for the next 40 years? Instead of beforehand, where it was like, well, if I don't do it by 40, then there's this kind of vague, mystical, like no man's land that I don't even know what's going to happen there.
Yeah, I mean,
that will
so
help us.
one of the most surprising things that I realized when I started researching menopause was that women in the UK and in the States, but this was about the UK, and I think the States is very similar,
Mm.
have more symptoms of menopause, complain more negatively about menopause, experience those symptoms more deeply, and are more miserable during those periods of time than
Okay.
anyone else in the world.
Mm.
Now, we're just women. So the only thing that could be going on here wasn't a physical thing, it was a mental thing. It was a societal mindset, it was a personal mindset around I'm no longer useful to the world. My life is over because I'm heading to the end of life. You know, seeing menopause as the start of the end rather than the beginning of the next chapter. And I also was pointed in the direction of Eastern culture. And in Eastern culture, they have for many centuries venerated women who've gone through menopause. And they see this, they have celebrations for it. And when you look at the experiences of women going through menopause in those countries, they have sometimes they don't even notice. So they have fewer symptoms and they generally enjoy the experience. And the main difference is this societal culture. So that pointed me in the direction of mindset matters. How we think about ourselves going into this process matters. And you're absolutely right. This is about trickling this message right the way down through the generations. Menopause is not the end of the world. It's the beginning of your second spring. So this second spring term is an Eastern term. And you now find there are a lot of women out there talking about embrace it, embrace your second spring. And my Facebook group is called exactly that, embrace your second spring. And it's shining a light on the possibilities that exist for you as a postmenopausal woman. So one of the things about our hormones is progesterone makes us put others before ourselves. It's a hormone that tells us to nurture. It's designed by nature to do so. We're designed to be nurturing young throughout this period. So we have a hormone that's telling us to nurture everyone. And as this hormone diminishes, we suddenly realize that we're in the game too. That we can actually put us in the picture and nurture us. And what a gift that is. To suddenly realize that I can be in the game too. I can look at me and I can nurture me and not feel guilty about it. Because the challenge is we can always do that. But then we've got this hormone that goes, and you must put yourself second. So we've got a hormone saying put yourself second most of our lives. And that hormone disappears and we're not driven by that. So that's beautiful in itself. And there's so much freedom in being postmenopausal because all of that knowledge, all of that wisdom, we can use it for good. And yet there's this thing where we can lose our sense of who we are and our sense of purpose, depending how we've aligned ourselves. So if we have a sense of purpose that says we're a mother, then that can be a challenge. If we have a sense of purpose that says, I'm, alluring and attractive and fertile, again, we're going to be losing that. We don't have the fertility. So that may go. And that's where society has been pushed by television, by ads, by all of the media that we see. It's around, and there was a period of time where if you were an older woman, you were taken off the telly because you weren't the image people wanted to see. So we've bought into this idea that women need to be sex gods, and they need to be caring and that they have no other function. And that's not true. So it's one of the things that I think is really important is to have a sense of purpose that's not tied to a role. And this goes for anybody changing. I could really have lost who I was when I stopped being a teacher, because for so long my sense of who I was I'm a teacher. And then I realized that was just a label. That's not me. That was just what I was doing. My sense of purpose is bigger than that.
Mm.
And so having a sense of purpose will really help move you forwards. Knowing that life exists in abundance, there's so much beauty in it, there's so much opportunity in it, there's so much freedom in it. Embrace it, enjoy it, go for it.
I'm with you. And I think that's where that loss comes from, when all the roles that you've held, like a career woman, partner, mother, sister, all those kind of things, and people start kind of rejigging their position, and then and like I didn't know about the progesterone, actually. That's really interesting to say that. So it can be then when suddenly you've turned the mirror turns directly on yourself, and like, who am I, and what am I doing? And then you have to come to terms with where you are, with everything, what all the choices that you've made up until that point. One of the things that I speak to as well is a couple of things that sometimes I have to have conversations around with clients, is the idea of regret, and then also the idea of and this is the one that people really don't like to admit to, but I'm like, we need to have this conversation about the idea of jealousy. The jealousy that you hold for the younger women, or the jealousy for, or the missed chances that you had for yourself, and is to like, where does that jealousy come from? And own the jealousy, because sometimes that jealousy is showing you something that maybe you didn't give yourself, but it doesn't mean it's too late. Don't be consumed by that feeling of the fact that you're not going to wear those jeans anymore and she can, or she's going to get the job over you, or
exactly.
It so trite, make it something that if you're going to be jealous of, and you have these feelings of envy and jealousy, look into that. What does that mean for you? Don't beat yourself down for feeling like that, because sometimes having those feelings of jealousy is actually just your soul, like a part of you just going, hang on, we want some of that, like, and it brings that need towards you, or that want and desire towards you.
Absolutely. It's pointing you at something that you desire. It's how I see jealousy. It points you at something you desire. And then it's like, okay, how do I attain it? What do I really want? How do I get there? I have this thing about going through life without regrets. We can get really stuck in the future, but we can also get really stuck in the past. And the beauty about the past is its history. And history doesn't define you. As a head teacher, I worked with children who for a lot of time, those children had been out of favor in the schools they were in. They were always pushed off, they were always excluded, whatever it was, they weren't wanted. And they had this vision of themselves as being somebody who's not wanted, somebody who can't behave, somebody who can't do these things. And it was really important for them to understand the message, which is the past is the past. The future is what you create it. And that future starts now. So let's leave the past behind. We had this phrase, thumbs up to a new beginning, which came from a student, because she said to me one day, she said, being here is like thumbs up to a new beginning every moment, because it doesn't matter what happens in the past. It can be forgiven, it can be forgotten, and the now can create the future. And she actually said that to me, and it's like, yes, that's absolutely what life's about. And when we hold on to regrets, and when we hold on to grudges, and when we hold on to these things, we're keeping ourselves in the past, and we're not allowing ourselves to create any future that we might want. And yet anything is possible. There's these beautiful phrases in transaction analysis, which is a form of psychology, which I really love. And they start with this idea that we come from a standpoint that says, I'm okay, and you're okay. So we always work within a context of coming from that place where everybody's okay. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that person. There's nothing wrong with me. They're not better or worse than me. We're just okay. Yeah. So we come from that point, which is beautiful. And that's where trust is much easier, when you come from that standpoint. And then the next two phrases are really beautiful too. Anybody can think. It's possible for any of us to think. We can do what we like. We can think. We're all amazing thinkers. And then the next one is the key. Everyone can change. So if you have regrets, if you have things in your life that you are jealous of or you're regretting, let them go, but use them. Go, okay, I've got a regret. I want to actually do something about that now, so I'm going to. Or do you know what? I can let that go because that's no longer a problem for me.
Mm.
But don't carry a suitcase of regrets with you because it keeps you anchored in the past.
We're closing in on the time as well, Jane. We could have spoken for so much more. I always love these conversations, and but just tell everyone where they can connect with you and the work that you're doing. If there's something new that's coming up for you as well.
Yeah, there is something new coming up, first of all. So I'll point to that. I've been working on, I love trees. I love being in nature and I love trees. And I've always used trees as a metaphor for life. And I had a tree as a metaphor and a physical diagram of the journey through the school when I was a head teacher. And I realized recently that I can use a tree as a metaphor for how we create the life of our dreams. We make the life of whatever possibilities we want to create it. And I did this through watching trees in storms and seeing how they're anchored so they just sway. And so what I'm now creating from this tree where we work on our roots, we create our foundations, we strengthen our roots, then we grow our trunk and our branches and we build our support and strengthen our support so that we can grow the future that we want and harvest the fruit that we wish to create. That tree is being turned into a 12-week coaching program, which is a group coaching program with kind of 3 sections. And also with this program, there is an intensive day retreat where we will spend time in woodland, in nature, and really explore, for a small number of people, really explore how their future can be created in their nows and what it means for them. And there's probably going to be an experience of cold water too, because if people want that, because that's also who I am.
Yeah, we didn't get to speak about that.
So that's coming in the new year, and I'm really excited to be bringing that because I can see so many possibilities in that. So that's my biggest project right now. And if people are interested in that, they can find me. I do have a website, although that's not always up to date. That's janereasoncoaching.me.uk. But the main place you'll find me is on LinkedIn as Jane Reason, because I post there every day and I like to connect with people there every day. And I talk a little bit about who I am and what's going on in my life, as well as profound comments. I also have a YouTube channel. So yeah, that's Jane Reason Coaching. So those are the main places. There is the Facebook group, Embracing Your Second Spring, as well.
Fantastic. Jane, thank you so much for sharing your reasoning. I'm sure you haven't heard that before.
Oh, I hear it all the time. Yes.
Well, imagine what I hear with a name like Carol,
Yes. Especially this time of year.
Exactly. So, forgive me with my poor puns, but I really enjoyed our conversation today.
No worries. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it too.
Thank you, Jane, for sharing your wisdom with me, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with other people that you feel may benefit from my guest's wisdom, and feel free to leave a review. You can find out more about me on my website. It's carolmaywhittick.com, carolmaywhittick.com. Connect with me on Facebook and LinkedIn under Carol May Whittick, and on Instagram, Casmic, Cazmick. So until the next episode, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.